It is Wednesday, December 12th, 2018. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with a very special two-party Georgia oral history project installment on the 2018 midterm elections. Joining me once again is Blake Aued, the news editor for the Flagpole Magazine here in Athens, where he writes the weekly City Dope column. Prior to his work for the Flagpole, he was a writer at the Athens-Banner Herald. He is also a regular contributor to WUGA's Athens News Matters with Alexia Ridley. Thank you very much, Blake, for taking some time this afternoon.
My pleasure, thanks.
For, once again, this very special edition of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project.
Special election.
Exactly. Well, you know, that's what we're here to talk about. But of course, because the way things are, Athens, Clark County elected the bulk of its local and county officials earlier in May during the primary. So we've got the 6-month lame duck period. So we had a mayor's race, a three-way race between Commissioner Kelley Gertz, Richie Knight, and Commissioner Harry Sims. How did that race turn out, and did it turn out the way you sort of expected it to?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to make predictions for these kind of races because, there's no polling. It's like you said, it's a May election, so it's during the primaries, so turnout is not very high. It's hard to tell who's going to show up and who's not. So Gertz won. I think he got about 60% of the vote, and the other two split the other 40. Harry got 30-something, and Knight got what? 6
9.
Or 8,
I think he got up to 9.
Okay, so Knight, everybody pretty much thought was going to be single digits, so that wasn't much of a surprise. But I think the consensus probably was that Kelley Gertz was going to win. Whether he was going to win without a runoff really was kind of the question, and he ended up, clearing that bar pretty easily.
Okay, and what do you expect from a Kelley Gertz administration that we haven't necessarily seen over the past 8 years with Nancy Denson as mayor?
Oh, we really haven't seen much with Nancy Denson as mayor. I mean, I think we've been falling behind as a community. A lot of the things that have happened during the Denson administration really have been things that, the ball got rolling under Heidi Davison, or even going back to Gwen Looney, things that have been in the works for 10, 20 years, like the Firefly Trail, which goes back to the 90s, and now it's finally happening. But, it's not anything that Nancy Denson really did. She just happened to be the one who was in office when it finally got going. Those things, those kind of projects, just because they involve like federal grants, and they just take like forever, to get approved and that kind of thing. So I think what we're going to see is we're just going to have to make up for a lot of lost time. When we look at our kind of peer cities or aspirational cities, like Greenville, South Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, places like that, and even suburbs in Metro Atlanta, like Roswell and Alpharetta, have really grown by leaps and bounds and are becoming more. They're doing a lot of things that Athens was known for doing with like bike lanes and trails and things like that. So that we've kind of fallen behind on. With the T-Splosh now, that's going to be kind of jump-started. A big issue in the campaign was affordable housing, where Athens being such a great place to live, as we're kind of victims of our own success. There are a lot of people who want to live here, and as more and more people move in, we're one of the fastest growing cities in the country, according to the census. So that's really been driving up real estate prices because we haven't had we don't have a whole lot of single family development going on. All the development that's been happening since the recession ended has basically been student-oriented development.
Sort of the luxury, luxury student living, downtown adjacent.
High-rises, and so that's been most of what we're seeing. And there was some thought that was probably going to relieve a lot of pressure on the neighborhoods, because students who rent a house in Boulevard were now going to live downtown in one of these new high-rises. But The university has also been growing, so I think that's eaten up a lot of that. You know, where we've seen the university get bigger. You know, every year it's another 500 kids, 1,000 kids coming in the freshman class, and that adds up. So, you know, that's been filling up a lot of those spaces. So we're going to see some action on that, definitely. There's a proposal to put in the next SPLOST, I think $44 million for affordable housing, which could be used for a lot of different purposes. You know, you could offer developers, private developers, you know, some incentive to set aside some affordable units. You know, maybe say to them, well, we'll build you a sidewalk, we'll hook up your sewer, we'll pay for some things, you know, if you set aside some units. And it could also be used to redevelop some public housing, like happened with Paldo a few years ago, where the housing authority partnered with a private developer and got some tax credits to go in and redevelop that. And we have a lot of, and it's not getting rid of public housing like Atlanta did. You know, that was a big mistake, you know, where they lost a lot of units and they pushed a lot of people out, you know, and gave them Section 8 vouchers, and now they're in Clayton County, and they don't have the kind of services, you know, that they had when they were in downtown Atlanta, which is not a good way to go about it. So this would be like the same number of units with like more on top of it.
Okay.
You know, in a mix of incomes. So because a lot of our public housing was built in the 40s and 50s. So it's really outdated.
Like Broadacres was the first.
Broadacres, I think, in the late 40s was the first, and then Parkview and Rock Springs followed. You know, Rock Springs might have been in the 60s, but and these now also are really prime real estate locations that are underutilized because you've got 1 or 2 story buildings on land that really, you know, could be 3 or 4 stories because now they're in the city. They're not on the edge of town anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's kind of an opportunity there to work with the housing authority on things like that, or even Bethel Homes, you know, north of downtown, which has been kind of a trouble spot for a very long time.
Sure.
A lot of crime there. So,
well, a lot of this, you know, a lot of the legislation or the public policy is going to have to come, you know, from the commission, which, you know, the sort of progressive wave ran down ticket in the May elections. Even in 3-way races for commission seats in District 5 and District 7, the progressive candidates, you know, one ousted an incumbent in Tim Denson, ousting Jared Bailey, and then Russell Edwards defeating Bill Overend and
Carl Blunt.
Carl Blunt.
Guy's name. Yeah.
Did the magnitude of sort of that progressive wave surprise you as a local observer?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's surprised me. I think it surprised a lot of people, and it's not that it was pretty clear that something like that was coming, you know. But I mean, the magnitude of it, I think, did surprise me. The fact that somebody could beat an incumbent and another candidate without a runoff is pretty surprising in general.
Right.
You know, that is really, really tough to pull off. But it just kind of speaks to, I think, not only do people want more progressive representation, because I don't think Tim Denson is really going to vote very differently from Jared Bailey. I think they agree on 95% of the issues, but they want someone who's going to be really vocal about it.
I see.
And Jared, you know, is more of a behind-the-scenes guy. You know, he doesn't have a lot to say. He kind of likes to keep his mouth shut and, you know, sort of operate behind the scenes. And Tim Denson, of course, you know, has been an activist and an organizer and is not afraid to pull out a bullhorn, you know. So that's kind of what people are looking for. And Russell Edwards, too. You know, I mean, Bill Overend has, you know, been a progressive for a very long time. But, you know, Russell is probably a little to the left of Bill, but also is, you know, has a history of being an activist, has a history of being an organizer, and, you know, put together the fight against the downtown Walmart and things like that. So, so it's not just how you vote. It's, are you going to be someone who's really going to push for things? You know, are you going to be vocal about it? That's what people were kind of looking for.
Were there other factors at play beyond just, because as you identified, the progressive label could just as easily go to some of these other candidates in those contested primaries. For example, District 9 with Tommy Valentine and Ovita Thornton. Did that? I guess we don't have exit polls and things like that. But what were
It'd be nice, but
did that race break along for example, racial factors with Ovida being an African American elected official on the Board of Education, and Tommy being a white man.
I don't think it necessarily broke along racial lines. I think it really broke along. I think the deciding factor in that race was probably that Tommy had just moved into the district.
Okay.
And, he was kind of new to the area. And, I do think he had some African American support, especially from younger people.
Oh, absolutely.
But Ovida has lived in the district for decades, and she represented the district on the school board for 16 years, something like that.
So it could also be a generational divide.
It was a little bit of a generational thing, and also just the fact that, people knew Ovida Thornton more so than they probably knew Tommy Valentine, because she's just been in the district for so long and has been, active and around in the district for so long compared to Tommy Valentine, I think.
The congressional primary, also on the same day, I think I remember reading your column, saying that it was a mystery for Scooby and the gang to solve how two relatively well-funded, well-put-together organizations in Chalice Montgomery and Richard Winfield ran relatively strong campaigns, had a very good organization put together, ran ahead of Tabitha Johnson Green here in Athens, Clark County, but got completely wiped out in the rest of the 10th district.
Well, I think Tabitha Johnson Green actually even won Clark County, didn't she?
I think she.
I think
it was relatively
it was pretty
split
evenly
3 ways.
Split 3 ways, yeah.
What, did you ever solve that mystery?
No. But just the fact that, she hadn't really even campaigned here very much, and no one knew her here at all. No one knew who she was. She had no connections to Athens. The fact that she would even split it 3 ways is kind of stunning to me. And my theory is just that probably a lot of people didn't know who any of them were, and they just voted for the first person on the ballot. I've seen some research that shows that I guess you've seen this too, that that could be a big advantage when people don't know anything about the race. They just check the first box.
Yeah, the last high-profile race, and I'm not comparing the 10th district primary, a May primary, to a high-profile race, but there was a Democratic candidate for Senate in South Carolina named Alvin Green, that nobody knew anything about, but he a few years ago.
He ran against some state senator or something.
And
somebody who was not a household name, but had been in politics.
But I think the political science research suggests in a low-profile race, it could happen if you stick with the ballot far enough down.
Right. And, there were a lot of rumors about that race, too. I heard a lot of things about, that Republicans down in Sandersville were pulling some shenanigans and, putting some new roofs on some black churches, and, that Tabitha was kind of a spoiler. And, I have no evidence to support that at all.
Sure.
But those are the kinds of things that were circulating in political circles, I guess.
Okay. So in the primaries for governor, were you surprised how the race turned out? How it sorted itself? Stacey Abrams versus Brian Kemp.
It's with the Democrats. I think that's another case of I figured Stacey Abrams was probably going to win, but did I think she was going to win 75-25?
Yeah, something like that.
Probably not. No. It was a lot bigger margin than I think than I thought it was going to be. The polling was 60-40-ish.
Sure.
And of course, polling primaries is not always that accurate.
But. What do you think? What do you think is the reasoning for the magnitude of the Abrams victory in that primary?
She just kind of had the strategy that really energized people more so than Stacey Evans. Stacey Evans was kind of running the typical campaign that you see Democrats run for statewide office, where it's, let's try to get some of those Republicans back. Let's reach out to moderates. Let's reach out to swing voters. And that's not what people wanted to hear this year. I think it's a lot like what we taled about with some of the commission races.
Sure.
People, they really wanted a full-throated defense of progressive politics, and that's what Stacey Abrams gave them.
So what do you think becomes of that sort of, we'll call it the Roy Barnes approach to campaign, Democratic politics? Does it have a future?
I don't think so. I mean, not in the near term, at least. I mean, we have such a polarized electorate. There really are not swing voters to reach out to. I mean, we're talking about a very small percentage of the population. Like if you look at the results from November, I mean, there might be 4 or 5 points difference between like any of the races. I mean, pretty much
Right.
It's obvious people just voted straight ticket.
Gary Black, I think, had the high of 53%.
Right. Gary Black probably got the highest percent of the vote, but, all the Republicans were in the 50 to 53 range, and all the Democrats were in the, 46 to 48, 49 range.
Right.
So, I mean, that just tells you that there's not very many swing voters out there to reach out to. So, really it's moving forward, I think, unless something drastic changes in our politics, I mean, it's really just going to be a base turnout game.
And on the Republican side, I think maybe you've given away the game with that response, but the smart money was initially on Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle.
Yeah.
To if not win it in a walk, but
yeah,
to win it handily.
Yeah. I mean, the question
that's not how it happened.
Be a runoff,
right? There was a runoff.
There was, yes.
What happened?
Well, he was pretty weak going into the runoff. I mean, I think the conventional wisdom was probably like, okay, if he doesn't get 50, he's probably going to get at least 45. But I think he wound up somewhere around 40.
Yeah, maybe a little bit below.
Even. Yeah, 38 or 39. So
not where you want to be as a front runner.
No, not really.
No.
And I and again, going back to the research, I mean, my understanding is usually, the weaker you are going into a runoff, being the front runner, the more likely you are to lose.
Right.
So if you're a weak front runner, probably the second place guy is really the favorite going into the runoff.
So I guess the real question is, how did Brian Kemp become the number 2?
Trump tweeted about him. I mean, no, I'm serious. The Cagle campaign was passing around polling that showed the exact moment when, they were about neck and neck, and all of a sudden Brian Kemp shoots up to 60, and Casey Cagle just drops off. In that moment, that was the moment when Trump tweeted and endorsed Brian Kemp, and that flipped the whole thing.
So how important was the Clay Tippins recording and the leaked secret conversation? Was that a game changer, or as you already mentioned?
When you look at the polling, I don't really see that it made a whole lot of difference, but I did hear a lot about it from voters.
Okay.
And of course, the kind of voters I talk to are the kind of voters who are really plugged into the day-to-day. I mean, they're the, 10% of people that really follows politics day in and day out. So as far as the casual voter, I don't know that it really made that much of an impact, because I didn't really see a whole lot in the polling that would have suggested that it made that much of a difference.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think Trump made that decision, President Trump made that decision to wade into a Republican gubernatorial runoff in Georgia?
I think it was the Perdue's. Sonny Perdue is obviously Trump's Secretary of Agriculture, and Senator David Perdue was one of the first elected officials to endorse Trump and to get behind him. So they're, very close to the president, and they were backing Brian Kemp. And I think they, one or both of them got in the president's ear, and Nick Ayers, who was Sonny Perdue's chief of staff, now he's resigned, but was at that time Mike Pence's chief of staff.
Right.
So that's another connection there. So I just think, they were in the Kemp camp, and so I think that they, somebody talked to the president and told him he needs to do this. Brian Kemp had never met Donald Trump, I don't think. When Donald Trump was campaigning in Georgia in 2016, Kemp was one of those people who didn't want anything to do with him. He wasn't appearing with Trump or anything like that, never endorsed him. There's no real connection there, but the connection is the Perdue's.
How would you categorize Brian Kemp's politics? How would you situate him within the Republican Party of Georgia?
I don't think, and I don't really know Brian that well. but I have been covering him for a long time.
Right.
I mean, he was a state senator here before he got elected Secretary of State, but I don't think he's a very ideological guy. His reputation in the state Senate was kind of being as a wishy-washy moderate, and I think he's just going to be sort of a standard issue Republican. I don't think he's going to be some sort of, Sam Brownback type or, really, really hard right. I don't see him deviating a whole lot from what we've seen in the past. But, one interesting thing is that Brian Kemp is actually the first real Republican governor that Georgia's ever had.
Absolutely.
Because Perdue and Deal were both Democrats who switched parties in the 90s. And I think they governed like Democrats. I mean, they governed like old-fashioned conservative Democrats. I don't see a whole lot of difference between like Nathan Deal and, maybe like a Joe Frank Harris or somebody, I mean, the party label is different, but I think, it's been a very strong pro-business administration with, and I see that continuing. I mean, I see, the Kemp administration focusing on really more issues of like small government and taxes, low taxes, sort of those traditional Republican economic principles, which might be kind of disappointing to some of his supporters. But I think when you look at him and you look at David Ralston still being in control of the House, I don't really see a lot of kind of social issues really getting a lot of traction. I think if we see like the religious freedom bill, I think that'll be a watered down version if one even gets through. So, yeah, I mean, just sort of regular Republican type stuff.
Well, I mean, skipping ahead and looking at the legislative races from last month, Democrats picked up, I think, a net of 11 seats in the House. Democrats lost the two Athens seats, 117, 119.
Right.
We can talk about why that is.
Yeah.
But how is that going to shape sort of the Democratic priorities, Republican priorities? The Republican caucus is now even more rural, male caucus. How does that shape the way legislation, nowhere near a veto-proof majority or a two-thirds for amendments? How is that going to change Georgia politics from how we've known it since roughly 2010?
Yeah. Well, ironically, I think that even though the Democrats made gains, the people they knocked out were really the more moderate type people. So you're probably going to see a more conservative, a more conservative majority. And there's always been that tension. I mean, Georgia politics has always been an intramural sport, and so that tension between like the rural and the suburban Republicans, the more, the more Tea Party type Republicans and the more Chamber of Commerce type Republicans, that's going to intensify. And Ralston is definitely a guy who I would put down on the side of the pro-business type of Republican. So. He's going to have his work cut out with him kind of keeping his caucus in line. And I think there might even be some situations where there will be an opportunity for Democrats to cut some deals if they want to. I don't know if they will, because that'll probably be really unpopular with their base if they're working with Republicans, but the opportunity will be there for them to be at the table, I think, at times.
On things like transportation or those sort of bread and butter.
Yeah,
issues.
That'd be a good example. Yeah, I think, where that might not be something that rural legislators are very interested in because they see it as just benefiting Metro Atlanta.
Right.
But of course, as Atlanta goes, so goes the rest of the state.
Increasingly, it seems that way.
So
at least within 55,000 votes.
Well, and then you will see more of an emphasis on rural Georgia now because that's what Kemp campaigned on, and of course there's that House committee that just came out with a report on legislation for rural Georgia that has some things in there like rural broadband.
Right.
They have a way to pay for rural broadband, which could open up some economic development doors, wineries. Hey, do what you got to do. I don't know.
Cast a wide
I don't know if
net.
you can really grow a whole lot of wine grapes down in South Georgia, but
North Georgia,
North
definitely.
Georgia for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
they already got some wineries up there, but.
Well, I guess the big question is rural healthcare.
Yeah.
What that is, unless it's expanding Medicaid,
Right.
and then the big teacher pay proposal that was sort of rolled out.
Yeah. Well,
Do we get anywhere with either of those bills?
well, from the Republican point of view, they see broadband as being a big part of the healthcare issue, because then if you have broadband, you can do things like telehealth.
Sure.
Where you don't have to actually be in the same room as the doctor. The doctor can be 100 miles away, but he's you're seeing the doctor via Skype pretty much. So that's part of it. They're looking at certificate of need, which I don't know if that's a great idea.
Mean for
if
people?
you want to open a hospital, you have to go get something called a certificate of need, which basically is the state certifying that there is a need for a hospital in that particular area. And the purpose of that is because there are a lot of private hospitals that have been opening, and maybe they really cater to cancer patients or things like that, but they cater to people who are insured.
Okay.
They don't have emergency rooms. They don't have to take everyone. So these are for-profit hospitals. And the fear is that if you start letting a lot of these kinds of for-profit hospitals open up, that they're really going to take a lot of people who actually can afford to pay for their health care away from public hospitals.
Right.
And that is really going to dent their bottom line because, they're providing a lot of charity care, and they depend on, really well-insured patients, basically to, kind of make ends meet. So I don't know if that's a great idea, but, at the same time, I mean, we've seen all these rural hospitals close, so obviously something's got to change, and they're still unwilling to do Medicaid expansion. I haven't even heard a whole lot of talk about waivers lately.
Right.
Which they could go to the federal government and try to set up their own expansion program, like places like Kentucky and Arkansas have done, which usually is not what Democrats would want, but better than nothing, would be a way that I would characterize that. So maybe that could still happen. But.
So going back to the actual election night, what we saw were those rural red counties get redder, the blue counties get bluer. Gwinnett went for Stacey Abrams, 57%. Cobb County went for Stacey Abrams, 54%. What's driving the suburban trend towards the Democratic Party?
Trump. I mean, not to be flip about it, but Trump is what's doing it. People don't like, and it's both a policy thing and a tone thing. I mean, people don't like the way that he talks. They don't like how divisive he is. I mean, generally your average suburban white voter just kind of wants everyone to get along and get things done. They're not interested in a whole bunch of shouting and name calling. That turns a lot of people off. And the policy stuff. I mean, the demonization of immigrants, things like that. I mean, that's not really going to fly. And in places like North Fulton, that's not an issue that really speaks to those people. So there's just not a lot of emphasis on really. I mean, even the tax cut isn't popular, and I mean, even a lot of people who are benefiting from the tax cut.
Sure.
Are looking at this tax cut and going like, okay, well, I got $30 a week, but now we're another $1 trillion in debt. I mean, these are voters who've been voting for candidates who've been promising to cut the deficit, for years or decades, and now they finally get the chance to do it. And what do? They just rack it up even more. So, I mean, Democrats now are the party of fiscal responsibility, in a way.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about suburban, those suburban counties, inner suburbs, very much pro-democratic trend and voting Democratic now. but we still see Forsyth, Cherokee, Bartow, still strong, or even Oconee County, closer to home, still 70-30 Republican County. Why is that?
And well, a big part of this too, I was just talking about like kind of white suburbanites who have been turned off by Trump, and I mean that's part of it. But like we were talking about earlier, there's not a whole lot of those voters. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there's not that much wiggle room there. But the other thing that's happening is, I mean, a lot of people, I think gentrification in Atlanta has got something to do with it. I think the demographics in a lot of these kind of inner ring suburbs like you're talking about in Cobb County and Gwinnett County are, people who are being pushed out of Atlanta.
Right.
So you've got a lot of, young white people moving into the city, and gentrification is happening. And I think a lot of people are being pushed out into the suburbs who are Democratic voters, and I think that's driving a lot of this as well.
Do you think those
and you're not seeing that in like Forsyth,
Sure.
I mean, that's too far out for that to be happening.
Right. Do you think those demographic trends and the political trends, sort of the consequences of the demographics, are those trends likely to continue, in your opinion?
I don't see them. I mean, yeah, it looks that way. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure something will happen at some point to
Sure
to change it, because things always change. But I don't see anything on the horizon that would change that trend right now. I think that'll continue. But it can only continue to a certain point because, I mean, eventually the Republican Party runs out of white people. I mean, if your strategy is going to be to cede the suburbs to the Democrats and try to run up the score in rural areas, well, guess what's growing faster? It's not the rural counties.
No.
So
not
I
by
mean,
any
that
stretch.
may have worked in 2018, but does that work in 2026? No, I seriously doubt it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of questions whether it'll work in 2020.
If it'll even work in 2020, sure.
Because 2018 being a midterm, turnout was up, but it still
It didn't quite hit presidential levels.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really the question, I think, on a lot of people's minds is what are the consequences in 2020? Because there is a statewide race with David Perdue, Senator Perdue.
Right.
So do you think the 2018 results, what does that portend for 2020? And journalists like you who have to cover it.
I think it just goes to show that anything can happen. I mean, I think the gap, even though Democrats didn't win this time, I think they closed the gap more than I thought that they would.
Yeah, 200,000 or so down to 55.
Going back to the 2010, which is really like the low water mark for Democrats. You've seen them improve pretty much about 1% every 2 years, or every 4 years, whatever. But they went from like Roy Barnes getting 43 to like Jason Carter getting 45, and Obama I think got 47. So I mean the trend line's been up,
right?
But it's been pretty shallow. And so to all of a sudden go from, Jason Carter getting 45 to Stacey Abrams getting like 49, that's a lot bigger jump than we've seen in the past. So, I guess the question is, was that like a one-time thing, or does the trajectory keep going the way that it is?
Right.
In which case, Georgia probably really will flip in 2020.
At the presidential level, or
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, I think
because it's not it's not going from what did Stacey Abrams get 48.8?
48. She ran 55,000 votes behind Brian Kemp, and he got 50.
So if you can make up 150,000 votes in 4 years, you can probably make up 55,000 in 2 years.
And in a presidential election year.
When you're not having to drag Democrats kicking and screaming to the polls, like they'll probably show up on their own.
Speaking of kicking and dragging to the polls, there was a runoff for Secretary of State and Public Service Commissioner. John Barrow, another Athens native, and Lindy Miller. 22% turnout, which wasn't surprising to anybody, I think,
Yeah.
who covers or watches Georgia politics.
Right.
Republicans continue their dominance in runoffs. Were there any danger signs, though, for the Republican Party, even in that runoff, that they won?
I mean, just the fact that it was close, you know? I mean, I didn't really expect John Barrow to win because the governor's race and the aftermath of that and all of the lawsuits and like Abrams not conceding for I guess she never really conceded, but you know, not admitting that she had lost for 2 weeks, you know, I mean, that really kind of sucked all the air out of the room. And by the time the Democrats really sort of circled around and went, oh, wait, that's right, we still have like 2 more races on the ballot, we got to run off, you know, I mean, it was too late really to get any kind of organization up and running. You know, they did do some.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really, you know, just in the last week of the campaign, I think. So they might have pulled it off if they just turned around on, you know, the Wednesday after Election Day and started campaigning for Barrow and Lindy Miller, who was on the PSC candidate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe they could have pulled it off, but that didn't happen. You know, and the Republicans did nothing. I mean, they did virtually nothing. I mean, there were some ads, but Brad Raffensperger, the guy who ended up winning, you know, he even ditched a GPB debate, which is that's like a mortal sin in Georgia politics, you know.
The Atlanta Press Club, or
the Atlanta Press Club debate, which is on GPB, sorry,
right?
But you know, just kind of, you know, made himself scarce and just basically relied on Republican voters to turn themselves back out, which they're pretty good at. So, they did
since
He
'92.
didn't really need to do anything. So I think that was a little bit of a missed opportunity for the Democrats, especially when you look at all the voter suppression issues that got so much attention. That was the next question, yeah. And, you know, electing a Democrat to that office of Secretary of State would have gone a long way towards solving a lot of those issues and really given them a much stronger footing, I think, in 2020 and 2022.
Well, what's your take on, you know, we heard so much about voter suppression, real, alleged.
Mm-hmm.
What was your takeaway as somebody who covered the election? The sort of signal from the noise. Separate that for us if you can.
Well, first of all, voter suppression is a real thing, and it does happen. And Republicans, you know, have admitted it happened. I mean, Brian Kemp was caught on tape talking about how something along the lines of they can't let all these Democrats vote because if all the Democrats actually vote, then the Republicans are gonna lose. You know, I mean, there's a court case over this in North Carolina where North Carolina took away some early voting, and the Republicans' defense was, well, but Democrats vote early, so that's why we have to take it away. You know, I mean, they actually said that in a courtroom. So, I mean, a lot of this is very partisan, and it's true that. Especially moving forward with the way that the country and the state are changing, that the Republican voter base is shrinking, and to counteract that, you know, they are doing things that are making it harder for the opposition to vote. Mm-hmm. You know, and that is a political tactic. I mean, everyone involved in politics knows this, even on the Republican side. So, but at the same time, I do think some of it was overblown. You know, I mean, there were a lot of questions and concerns about purging the voter rolls, which is something that happens every 2 years and something that has been happening every 2 years for a very long time. I think that was something the Democrats actually started doing, and you know, it could be done better. You know, and I think Brian Kemp definitely, like, you know, probably purged a lot more people than he really probably had to purge. You know, he definitely went all out with that kind of thing. But, you know, it is something that happens, and it's something that he's required to do. Mm-hmm. And part of it, I think, is a lot of this is really arcane stuff. You know, I mean, this is the sausage making kind of thing that like reporters know about, but like,
right,
we don't usually really write about because it's just kind of like, it's not something that anyone would ever really be that interested in.
Right.
But then suddenly people were interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there were a lot of questions about, you know, about how the elections are being conducted. So hopefully people, kind of got educated about that because a lot of reporting was done on the process, which is not something that, we would have done before because it's just kind of like, well, people just want to know who won. They don't want to know how, like, all the votes are actually counted and blah, blah, blah.
What exact match?
Right. What does exact
absentee
match mean? But people got really interested in that kind of thing. So, like, we had to scramble to kind of really catch up to our readers, I think, and sort of explain how the process works and in the interim. And especially with social media and like all the whatever, I mean, it's hard to break through all of the noise and kind of lay out facts for people because they get themselves so riled up that like when you come in and start talking facts to people, sometimes they don't want to hear it because they've already got their mind made up, that it's some kind of conspiracy. So, but I mean, that's kind of a general challenge of doing journalism in 2018.
Right. There's a lot of competing voices. When the process gets democratized, you take the good with the bad.
Right.
I suppose.
Yeah. There's some ups and some downs.
Jim Galloway gave a talk over for SPIA not too long after the election. What he said was, based on the results of the election, that it was his belief that the racially polarized electorate, which has held sway in Georgia for most of the recent past, its days are numbered just by sheer demographics. Where do you come down on that?
That the days of the racially
polarized electorate in Georgia they're numbered.
They're numbered. I don't know that I agree with that, actually. I mean, I hate to disagree with Galloway because he probably knows more than I do, but I mean, no, I don't see that happening. I think for that to happen, well, I'm assuming what he meant by that is that I guess that minority voters are going to become more open to voting for Republicans. Is that what he meant by it?
Could be, or vice versa, or that white voters would also.
Well, if white voters still for the Democrats, then there's not going to be a Republican Party anymore, and I don't see that happening. But
well, I guess a better question to take on that would be, what would it take to get to the point where the racially polarized electorate is broken?
Oh man, I mean, go back in time and end slavery in like the 18th century? Like I
guess if either of us had a really good question, we could be high-powered consultants and thought leaders. But.
Well, I will say this. For the Republican Party to stay in power in Georgia, they're going to have to reach out beyond white people.
And this election confirmed that for you.
Right. I mean, this is seems to me to be sort of the last gasp of the all-white Republican Party staying in power because, like I said earlier, you're going to run out of white people. There's not a whole lot of white Democrats out there that you could flip anymore. That those days are over. So the Republican Party has a really tough choice ahead of them where I think to survive and be relevant in the medium to long term, they have to find a way to get minorities to vote for them. But any kind of policy or even rhetoric that they would use to do that, I think would infuriate their base. And so in the short term, that's very dangerous for them.
Right. Do you think redistricting, reapportionment, that's going to be coming up in 2021, Georgia's probably going to gain at least probably one congressional seat?
That sounds like a good bet. Yeah.
What do you think that process is going to look like based on 2018 newfound Democratic strength in the suburbs? How is that going to play out, and what are those effects going to be?
I think redistricting is going to be really it's always contentious, but I think it'll be especially contentious this time around. If for no other reason than, I think people are much more attuned to politics since 2016 than they were prior to 2016. So that's the kind of arcane thing that, is important and that journalists will report on, but I wouldn't really expect the general public to pay that much attention to, but I think now that they will. Um, and it's gonna where's the growth? I guess would be the question. And if the growth has been in the Atlanta suburbs, then or in Metro Atlanta, then it's probably not going to be easy to draw a Republican district because of the changes that we've been discussing. Where would you put it to make it majority Republican? So there may be some packing going on. They may try to. I don't think you can pack the 3 Democratic Metro Atlanta districts much more than they already are. So
right, the 4th, 5th, and 13th.
Yeah. Scott, Johnson, and Lewis. Yeah, I don't know what the numbers are. Sorry.
Nah.
Yeah, and then Bishop down in South Georgia, but maybe they go after Bishop again.
What
because that's
early
on
on
paper,
early on
on
election
paper,
night.
That's a swing district on paper. So maybe they go after Bishop, and maybe they draw another Democratic district in Atlanta, and shuffle some things around and go after Bishop.
And perhaps it is a swing district when you don't have an incumbent,
sure,
like Sanford Bishop, who's been there since 1992.
And he's been, sort of single-handedly saving that. He had a scare, I think, at the Tea Party year back in 2010, maybe. But
early on election night, it seemed touch and go there for a while.
Yeah, but he's been pretty much untouchable since then. So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways they could go with it. I mean, I think if they find a way to draw another Republican district, I think they'll probably do it. But I think there'll be a lot of outrage because then you'll be in a situation where you're in a state that's basically 50-50, and Republicans have what would it be, 11-4 advantage because we got 14 now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it'd be 11-4.
Yes.
So, almost 3/4 of your congressional districts are Republican in a state that's pretty much 50-50, And there's a lot that can happen between now and then. I mean, there have been some lawsuits and partisan gerrymandering maybe. The courts might say that that's unconstitutional.
Well,
I think this is going to wind up in court.
Oh,
sure.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Right, because, the cynic would say, well, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Maryland,
North Carolina.
North Carolina's still going to play out, not because of voter fraud, but actual probable election fraud, and we're talking redistricting. But I think there are 2 Democratic.
Well, but I mean, there have been
seats,
some lawsuits over redistricting too, where the courts are saying, some of the lower courts are saying, that it's unconstitutional to gerrymander. Partisan gerrymandering, to the extent that it's been done in some states, and you could throw Illinois in there too on the Democratic side. And some states they've had referendums where they've established independent commissions to do this kind of thing.
Right.
I don't see that on the horizon in Georgia. But there's kind of 2 ways they can go with this. I mean, they can do it. They can do it to give themselves an advantage, but kind of be fair about it.
Right.
Or they can do like what the Democrats did in 2002.
The Roy Barnes route.
The Roy Barnes route, which is just whole hog, make it just look like a Rorschach kind of thing, where you're just like, it's like looking at clouds. You're like, is that a swan? Like, is that a lizard?
Yeah, I think there were some districts on the coast where you literally had to take a boat. There were no roads,
they didn't even connect
direct
to each
routes.
Other. Yeah, you had some that had 2 people in them.
The multi-member
posts.
districts, multi-member districts,
right.
which the court struck down multi-member districts.
Out, So I would not be surprised if you just see the courts draw the maps like they did in 2002 this time.
Which that seems to be the direction they're going in places like Pennsylvania, where if the legislature and the Democratic governor can't agree, it just defaults to the court, the special master, to draw the maps, which it'll be, and of course this is all dependent on how well the census goes, which
that's a little bit of a question too.
Right, that's a whole other question.
Where you've got this thing where the Trump administration wants to ask people about their citizenship.
Which is also in court right now.
Right, yeah. So. And so the thought is that's going to lead to, there's always an undercount of Hispanic people, for that reason. but this will make it even further exacerbate that, you know, where the Latino community is underrepresented in the census.
Well, Blake, I know you've got places to be, and we could probably talk about this for another couple hours, and it'll
Bring
be
a six-pack next time.
It'll be a very interesting next couple of years.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we sit down and talk before then.
It's like the old Chinese proverb, you know, may you live in interesting times.
May you live in interesting times.
Yeah,
well,
that was not meant as a good thing.
No.
That was
you
want to
live
someone you didn't like.
You want to live in boring halcyon days.
Yeah.
Well, Blake, thank you very much on behalf of the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you.